choice made by Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority staff in the age of Skype. Staff travelled all over the place, to Australia, Hong Kong, Dubai and the US to conduct convention centre request for proposals interviews, $48,000. It's hard to work out what some of these trips were to do with when it's abridged so much. 2 staff went to Spain for the purpose of stadium and investors, $30,000. A deputy chief executive travelled to Italy to participate in a think tank to consider New Zealand as a case study to relocate populations. What does your intuition say, which is all you can rely on? Do you think
the frustration for me is that, they've just postponed the convention centre again. And so they've spent a phenomenal amount of money and haven't got anywhere with it. And so that's part of the frustration. Plus it's from Joe Average here in Christchurch, who is still battling with EQ and everyone else. And then they look at that and they go, what the...
And then there's the question of to what extent you are inevitably influenced or not by having someone pay for a trip. Aquaculture New Zealand is paying for a delegation of councillors and staff from the South Island and a Southern MP to see how the aquaculture industry works in Norway. And Aquaculture New Zealand is primarily funded by the industry, the mussel farmers, salmon farmers, oyster farmers. And one of the councillors going, David Oddie, chairs the hearings panel that deals with marine farm resource consents in the Marlborough Sounds, and he'll sit on the panel of councillors hearing submissions on the Marlborough Environment Plan. And he makes the point that people like him can be lobbied any time. He doesn't have to be overseas to be lobbied. Do you agree with him?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I mean, as journalists, we take trips that are funded by people and we always disclose it and we always weigh up very carefully whether or not we'll go on it, whether it's a story we'd do anyway, could do another way, or an only doing because we're offered a trip. I do agree with him. I'd like to think that people are a little bit more grown up than that. And you go places, you meet people, you gather information and you learn, and then hopefully you make your decisions. You disclose everything. I'm huge on disclosure. But yeah, I do agree with him.
You can set up a Chinese wall in your mind and...
No, you can't, because once you hear something, you can never unhear it. But I think you can be grown up enough and think, oh, well, I went and saw that and that was really cool. But how actually does it apply to this decision I'm making?
Okay. Do you agree, Mark?
Totally. I mean, people need to be informed, so it's better that you get them there and get them informed. And if the aquaculture people are paying for it, then all well and good. But as long as Alan said, you've got that transparency, that disclosure, then any decision that's made will always, have that tagged onto it. So I would think in New Zealand, you're not going to get away with being unduly influenced.
You'd hope not, eh? That the people would actually scrutinise the decisions you made after a trip like that more closely. So they'd have to be even more robust in their thinking.
One more tricky decision before we go. The media outlet BuzzFeed has called Donald Trump a health hazard. It reckons the Trump campaign is directly opposed to the freedoms of its employees. So it has turned down $1.3 million worth of advertising. His proposed ban on international travel for Muslims would make it impossible for our employees to do their jobs, says BuzzFeed. So BuzzFeed is treating the, Republican National Committee dollars as it would Benson and Hedges dollars, which it's quite entitled to legally. But is that good for a democracy, for a news outlet to take a stand like that, do you think?
Yes, it's got every right to. And it will have generated far more goodwill and extra commercial money than the $1.3 million by making a public stance like this.
What if it was a body like NZME or Fairfax or TVNZ or...
They've got a right to turn down advertising. I don't know of it happening very often, but we've all got a right to do it. We're private companies.
Okay, politics or no politics.
Yep.
Get the editorial right, and that's all you should need.
Woohoo, I'm going to quote you on that.
Yep. Get the editorial right, that's all you should need. Mark Ingalls, thank you very much for coming on the panel.
Thank you.
Always a great pleasure, and the same to you, Alan Reid. Thank you very much for your company. And thank you, everybody. We are back tomorrow, and stand by for Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell. On behalf of our Checkpoint team, thank you for joining us. Tonight, an 11-year-old girl on life when your home is a van shared with 7 other family members. TA, who's here in Auckland, tells us very matter-of-factly what life is like in her shoes, an extraordinary insight into the problem of homelessness from an 11-year-old girl. Bernie Sanders needed a huge day. He didn't have one. Hillary Clinton steps up and says, "It's me." We go live to the States. Sky and Vodafone, merger talks and what they mean, the $20 billion Defence Force plan. And when the MSD's flying squad went out checking homeless people sleeping in cars, where did they go? Who did they see? All of that and more coming up in the next 89 minutes. But we begin, of course, with RNZ News. And tonight, our brilliant newsreader is Sharon Brett-Kelly.
Kia ora, good evening. 4 people are reported to be dead and many more injured after the police opened fire on university students in Papua New Guinea. Reuters is reporting as many as 15 have been injured, and the police are reported to be still chasing and shooting students in the suburb of the capital, Port Moresby. But the University of Papua New Guinea says no students were killed, and the police opened fire with tear gas canisters only. Thousands have been protesting and boycotting classes for weeks amid calls for the Prime Minister Peter O'Neill to resign over corruption allegations. One student leader says the police fired directly into the crowd when students would not let them arrest the president of the Student Council. A hospital admissions official says there were more clashes outside the General Hospital when wounded students were brought in for treatment. The ABC's Eric Torchek was interviewing student leader Christopher Kiplan when firing began.
Believe me, I was in the front and I saw them shot students and they almost shot me, but I pulled back. And
What?
I'm running away now.
Student leader Christopher Kiplan speaking to reporter Eric Torchek on his cell phone. Meanwhile, tonight's Oceania Nations Cup football semi-final between New Zealand and New Caledonia in Port Moresby will still go ahead despite the violence. The stadium where the match is being held is 6 kilometres from the university. A statement from the Oceania Football Confederation says after taking advice from a security consultant and following discussions with the teams, the semi-finals will proceed. Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade is urging Australians in PNG to exercise a high degree of caution. Travellers are being warned of unrest related to student protests in other parts of the country, including the second biggest city, Lae. The New Zealand government's advice for travellers to PNG was last updated in January. Hillary Clinton is declaring victory as the presumptive presidential nominee of the Democratic Party. Mrs. Clinton has won the Democratic vote in New Jersey and is projected to win in New Mexico and South Dakota, 3 of the 6 states holding primaries today. She's thanked her supporters for helping her reach a historic moment.
Thanks to you, we've reached a milestone. The first time in our nation's history that a woman will be a major party's nominee.
Hillary Clinton at a rally in Brooklyn, New York. The California primary will count the most, where polls show the race between Mrs. Clinton and her rival Bernie Sanders is close. He's hoping for a win in the state and aims to try to sway superdelegates to support him instead of Mrs. Clinton at the party's convention in July. The Prime Minister says the level of money the government intends to spend on the Defence Force is moderate and justified. The government has unveiled a $20 billion long-term investment plan in the latest Defence White Paper, which includes a new cyber security system. The paper also outlines a plan to replace aircraft, frigates and possibly the Army's light armoured vehicles in the next 15 years. John Campbell says, firstly, the spending is over a long period of time.
Secondly, if you look at our spending at about 1.1% of GDP, it's at the more modest end of spending when nations allocate resources towards our military capability. I think also if you think about what the military do, other than just give us some sheer protection, they also have quite a big humanitarian role in what they do.
The Prime Minister John Campbell. The government is considering pre-purchasing some motel rooms to help people who are in the most critical housing need. The Social Housing Minister, Paula Bennett, appeared before the Social Services Select Committee this morning. She told the MPs if the government pre-purchased 100 rooms, they would be easily filled in a week.
We've got a report that's just come in yesterday morning that we're looking at that if that just sort of gets us through particularly this winter period, and it's something we could do relatively quickly, being in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and we're looking at that as sort of options as well to try and fill the gap while we're there.
Paula Bennett, the Social Housing Minister. People taking up the rooms may not have to pay back the money. To sport now, and the All Whites have the chance for redemption when they play New Caledonia in the semi-final of the Oceania Nations Cup football competition in Port Moresby tonight. 4 years ago, the All Whites lost to New Caledonia in the equivalent match and failed to qualify for the Confederations Cup, denying New Zealand football a $1 million payday. The All Whites have won all 3 of their pool games at the tournament, and coach Anthony Hudson says they can't afford to become timid now.
The boys in the camp and whoever we play will be satisfied with nothing but a win, so we're going all out for the win, and we need 3 points just to make sure that it is guaranteed.
The All Whites coach Anthony Hudson. The match kicks off in about an hour. The New Zealand golfer Tim Wilkinson has shown there's no room for sympathy in top-level golf. The 37-year-old finished second at the qualifying tournament in Florida to qualify for next week's US Open, which would be his first major. However, Wilkinson was involved in a controversial incident that proved costly for his playing partner. During his final round, his 17-year-old playing partner, Won Jun Lee, illegally repaired a pitch mark behind his ball as it sat on the fringe of the green. Wilkinson saw the incident and reported it to match officials. Lee was subsequently penalised 2 shots and finished the tournament at 5 under par, missing qualification for the US Open by just 1 shot. And that's the news.
Tonight on Night's Animal Law, as in the law as it applies to how we humans treat them. A bit of a law of the jungle from their point of view. The Australian legal expert Dr. Ian Robertson explains, and this week's overseas correspondent Peggy Ravel reports from Alberta, Canada, or at least one bit of Alberta that hasn't caught fire, on nights from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from the Met Service to midnight tomorrow. In Northland, rain and northeast gales easing tomorrow. Auckland, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and northern Gisborne, cloudy. A few showers today, occasional rain tomorrow. The remainder of Gisborne, also Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine today. High cloud increasing tomorrow. Waikato to Taranaki, including Taumaranui, mostly cloudy with scattered rain developing tomorrow afternoon. Wanganui and Taihape to Wellington, fine today, high cloud tomorrow with late rain for Kapiti and Wellington. Nelson and Buller, cloud increasing today with drizzle tonight. Rain tomorrow with heavy falls possible later. Westland and Fiordland, rain developing about Fiordland this afternoon, and elsewhere overnight with some heavy falls easing from the south tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury, fine today, cloud increasing tomorrow with rain about northern Marlborough from afternoon, possibly heavy, scattered rain elsewhere. Otago and Southland, high cloud increasing, patchy rain tomorrow, and the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy. And I'll have the headlines at 5:30.
Thanks very much indeed, Sharon. Obviously, we led the news with the shootings in PNG, and we will have the latest on those and update what's going on up there as soon as we possibly can. Also tonight, an 11-year-old girl tells us about her experience of being homeless in Auckland. But we begin with the US presidential hopeful Hillary Clinton. This afternoon, she has claimed victory in the race for the Democratic nomination, and with it, she appears to have made US history. 6 states were voting for the Democratic nominee today, and Mrs. Clinton thanked the supporters at her campaign headquarters in Brooklyn for helping her to become the first woman to be a major party nominee.
Thanks to you, we've reached a milestone. The first time in our nation's history that a woman will be a major party's nominee for President of the United States. I want to congratulate Senator Sanders for the extraordinary campaign he has run. He has spent his long career in public service fighting for progressive causes and principles, and he's excited millions of voters, especially young people. And let there be no mistake, Senator Sanders, his campaign, and the vigorous debate that we've had about how to raise incomes, reduce inequality, increase upward mobility have been very good for the Democratic Party and for America.
After a decisive win in New Jersey, where she defeated Bernie Sanders by a clear 26%, Hillary Clinton made her victory speech before New Mexico and South Dakota were called in her favour, and before the polls had even closed in California. About an hour ago, the US President Barack Obama called Mrs. Clinton to congratulate her on securing the delegates needed to become the Democratic presidential nominee. Our US correspondent Patrice Howard has been following the vote from Los Angeles, and she joins us now via Skype. Patrice, it's wonderful to have you with us. Thank you for coming in. This has been a big day for Hillary Clinton and a very disappointing one for Bernie Sanders. Before we go to Mrs. Clinton, what has been the reaction so far from the Sanders camp?
Well, if you look right now, many of his supporters are currently waiting for him to take the stage here in California, and they have been reacting through the night to the results that we've had coming in from the various states. Every time Clinton gets a win, they show a sign of disappointment, of course, sighing and whatnot. But Bernie Sanders' camp, as of right now, staying somewhat tight-lipped. We are waiting for him to announce whether or not this is the end of the road for him, or whether he is going to be taking that revolution forward as he has said he was going to do. So really, moments away from that, likely the results of California will set the tone for what he decides to do ultimately.
Patrice, I've been having a very busy afternoon here, and I've only just caught up with the news that Barack Obama has called Hillary Clinton to congratulate her. Obviously, that's not an event that takes place in isolation. That's very meaningful and very pointed, isn't it?
Yes, the White House has sort of hinted that we would hear from President Barack Obama sooner rather than later, and he is likely to show his further support and officially endorse Hillary Clinton even as soon as this week. And of course, that would be a much-needed bump, a much-needed momentum that she would need heading into the convention. And really, it's a sign that Barack Obama might be encouraging his own supporters to sort of look at her and to consider her as a strong candidate who can take on Donald Trump. President Barack Obama is clearly sick of waiting on the sidelines in this campaign. He's ready to get involved.
In the meantime, California, if Sanders does well in California, there is a strong moral argument, and certainly his camp would say this and is saying this, for him to continue. So California is crucial. They close late. How's it going there?
Well, right now, Hillary Clinton does have a lead in this state. She's up about 300,000 votes right now. The results are not in yet, but it is likely that she is going to take California. Of course, I can't say that yet. People are still voting. We still have a number of votes coming in from across a very big U.S. state. So, of course, it's too early to say. But Bernie Sanders has come into this primary day really adamant about taking his campaign to the convention. In the past few hours and even days, though, we've heard less of that rhetoric. We've heard less enthusiasm about that. And we've even heard a report from the New York Times saying that he may be laying off some of his staff as soon as this week, as soon as tomorrow even. So these are signs that, of course, you're balancing as we head into the last hour here in California. We're likely to see results, and that really will dictate the tone of this going forward. If Bernie Sanders is going to continue with his revolution into the convention, or if he's going to unite this party, which is really what Hillary Clinton will need. She'll need that support of Bernie Sanders supporters and the support of the party if she's going to beat Trump ultimately in the general election.
Yes, gosh, we may know all of this in the next few hours. In the meantime, we heard a clip from Hillary Clinton just before we crossed you, Patrice, and she was being very generous about Bernie Sanders, and she should be, because he has run an extraordinary campaign against all odds and has galvanized supporters that Hillary Clinton will desperately need if she is to take Donald Trump on. What else did she say in that speech?
Sure. Well, Hillary Clinton really focused on the fact that she has made history here in the U.S. Of course, this is the first time we've seen a woman really go forward and really claim this victory. Here, we're seeing her talk about how she wishes she could tell her mother and show her mother, who really encouraged her early on to really go forward with her ambitions as a young woman and to break that glass ceiling. And so that is really what she focused on. She focused on the fact that this is history in the making and that should be noted. It's really been ignored throughout this entire sort of primary season. So that is what she celebrated. But she also said that we have a task to do, her party anyway, moving forward, and that is to beat Donald Trump and to do so with confidence.
Patrice Howard live via Skype from the US. Thank you so much, Patrice. As Patrice said, she said lots of things. One of them is, of course, that the votes are still being counted in California. What happens there may entirely determine how immediately Bernie Sanders acts and what he does. If we hear anything in the course of the next 75 minutes, obviously we will let you know. Patrice also spoke about Donald Trump, well, speaking after his wins in New Jersey, South Dakota and New Mexico from one of his golf courses in suburban New York City. Republican candidate Donald Trump announced he would be giving a major tell-all speech about the Clintons, not only Hillary, but Bill, next week.
The Clintons have turned the politics of personal enrichment into an art form for themselves. They've made hundreds of millions of dollars selling access, selling favors, selling government contracts, and I mean hundreds of millions of dollars. Secretary Clinton even did all of the work on a totally illegal private server. Something that how she's getting away with this, folks, nobody understands. Designed to keep her corrupt dealings out of the public record, putting the security of the entire country at risk, and a president in a corrupt system is totally protecting her. Not right. I am going to give a major speech on probably Monday of next week, and we're going to be discussing all of the things that have taken place with the Clintons. I think you're going to find it very informative and very, very interesting.
Donald Trump, who certainly seems to think that he is up against Hillary Clinton and also, by the sound of things, her husband, Bill Clinton, too. We will update you on California and Bernie Sanders as the program goes on. Let's head home now, and lots happening here today. Sky, Vodafone, a potential merger, a big spend on defence. We have all of that coming up. But over the past weeks, as regular listeners and viewers will know, we've looked a great deal at homelessness in this country, Auckland in particular, emergency housing and huge debts to wins for it. We have more on that coming up later tonight. The high cost of housing, the shortage of housing at rentals people can afford. And as the extent of the problem became apparent, Te Puia Marae in Auckland opened its doors to people, an act of generosity and humanity that has seen them becoming a temporary home to roughly 30 families. One of the children who's arrived at Te Puia is T.A. She's 11. Her mum has a job, which is precious, obviously, and means they're staying in Auckland, but she doesn't earn enough to cover the costs of private housing, and they've slipped through the cracks of social housing provision. So they live in a van. This afternoon, T.A. told me about her life.
I am living in Te Puia Marae.
And what's that like?
It's pretty cool. It's cool how they opened up their doors to us. But yeah, I just want a house and that.
And where were you living before Te Puia Marae?
In our van. Yeah.
And who's in your van? Who was in your van every night?
Mum, Dad, my 3 brothers and 2 sisters, and me.
So in total, how many of you?
That's 8.
8 in total in one van. And did you sleep in your van every night?
Yes.
And how long have you been doing that for, T.A.?
Around February.
So for some months now?
Yes.
And what's that like? Do you get any sleep?
Some nights.
Yeah, if people get sick or if people are wriggling around or you need to go outside for a wee or something, it must be quite tough.
Yes, very.
And where do you shower? Where do you go to the toilet? Where do you get changed? Where do you just get to be by yourself?
There's no space for by yourself. But we used to shower at my mum's job
At your mum's job?
in the morning, early,
What time?
around about 6, 7.
So before everyone starts work, you go into your mum's job and use the shower?
Yes,
You went for a scholarship to St Cuth's here and you sat the exam, did you?
yes.
And how did you go?
I think I did pretty good for how I do in school, but made it. I just missed out. There are some girls that are more fortunate than me.
How much did you miss out by?
2 points.
So you missed out on getting a scholarship to St Cuth's by 2 marks.
Yes, but that's okay.
And you're living in a van.
Yes, it just made me push myself more to do better.
Where do you do your homework? Where do you do your homework? Where do you sit to study? Where did you swap for your tests? Where do you write your essays? Where do you do your reading?
Mum's office.
So your mum's got a job,
Yes.
but it's not enough money for you all to be able to afford a house.
Yeah. Houses are very expensive these days.
Yeah, they are. They're very expensive these days. Lots of people are talking about that, TA. TA, what do you like at school?
My favorite subjects are maths and writing.
Maths and writing?
Yes.
And are you good at maths and writing?
Yes, I'm very good.
Good girl. That's something to be proud of.
Yes.
And do you play any sport?
I play netball.
And what position? What's your favourite position?
Wing attack, actually.
What do you want? TA, what do you want most of all in the world?
A library.
Are you going to have another go at that scholarship?
Yes.
And how are your brothers and sisters? Are they all happy?
No, they're not happy, but they're okay.
And are they healthy? Do people get colds? Do people get sick when you're sleeping in that van? 8 of you in one van?
Yes, they're all sick. Even I'm sick right now.
Yeah, I can hear you've got a bit of a sniffle.
Yes.
What's it been like at the marae? Has it been nice to have a little bit of space to yourself?
Yes, it actually has, and they have good food.
Oh, do they? Oh, that's nice. What do you eat normally? What are your family meals? What do you have in the evening for dinner?
Oh, we used to have takeaways, but we're all sick of takeaways.
Because you've got no kitchen, I guess, right? Nowhere to cook, nowhere to sit down around a table and eat. So you just have to get takeaways and eat them in the van, do you?
Yes. Or sometimes we go to parks and drive around and eat our food. The hardest part is actually not being able to read in the van, because you don't have space. They're all up in your face.
Yeah, I bet. Wriggling. Have you got little brothers and sisters?
Yes.
Yeah, they wriggle, don't they? They're never still.
Yeah, and there's not much light because we'll waste the battery. I can't read.
Yeah. What would you like to tell the Prime Minister about your life? Have you ever thought about that? Do you know John Key? Do you know about him?
Yes.
What?
I actually studied him.
What would you like to say to him about the fact that you live in a van?
Try walking in my shoes. Not actually that easy.
Try walking in my shoes. It's not actually that easy. That's TA. She's 11 years old. Her family has been taken in by Te Puia marae. 30 families have been taken in by the marae in Auckland as the housing crisis takes its toll. TA is part of a family of 8 who have been sleeping in a van for some months prior to being taken in by the marae. We will have more on that story and the politics of it all later in Checkpoint. There are conflicting reports of deaths at the University of Papua New Guinea after police stopped stop the group of students from rallying outside Parliament. The police say no students have been killed, but 8 have been injured. The ABC is reporting 4 students are dead, but students spoken to by RNZ were unable to confirm any of it. The university says no one has been killed and the police opened fire with tear gas only. But in this audio collected by the ABC, it sounds like automatic weapons are possibly being fired in the background.
Believe me, I was in the front and I saw them shot students and they almost shot me, but I pulled back. And
What?
So I'm running away. Eric, do that. Eric, I'm running away now. Eric.
Yes, still here.
You can hear it. I'm running away with the civilians now.
What happened then? What just happened?
The police are trying to shoot the civilians plus the students.
Police are trying to shoot civilians plus the students. That was the voice of a student who was being interviewed by the ABC's Eric Torchek earlier today when what appears to be shooting broke out. RNZ International's Ben Robinson-Drawbridges has been following this story and he joins us now live from Wellington. Ben, welcome to Checkpoint. Nice to have you with us. What do you know further? Has there been any confirmation out of PNG, out of Port Moresby about what's happened?
John, what we've heard is that no students have actually been killed. We spoke to the police not long ago who confirmed that 8 students had been injured, but none killed. I spoke to one of the student leaders about an hour and a half after police action this morning, and he said that 4 students had been injured badly. I spoke to another student who was hiding in one of the dormitory bathrooms suffering from what he described as tear gas suffocation. But after speaking to the university's public affairs manager, he told me that no students have been killed by the police action.
Okay, boy, this is all very conflicting information that's coming in. Ben, I know it's almost impossible to say, but is there any idea what police were firing? There were clearly the sounds of something being fired, suggestions that it was automatic gunfire, suggestions it was tear gas. Any word at all?
No, I'm afraid we've been unable to confirm that, but as you say, it does sound a lot like automatic weapons are being fired there. But the good news is that no students have been killed. That's the word we're taking at the moment, which is remarkable considering how long this student protest has been going on. They've been boycotting classes since the start of May, trying to put pressure on the Prime Minister to step down. He's involved in an alleged corruption scandal and they feel he needs to step aside. Students also believe that the economy in PNG is falling into shambles and so they want change, they want political change. They were trying to go to Parliament today to rally where a vote of no confidence was going to be tabled in the government. But following this action by police, Parliament has been adjourned until August. So now it's unclear what students will do, whether they'll resume their boycott, because the university has scheduled a resumption of classes from next week. They tell me that medical students have returned to class and the majority of students are expected back on campus next week. So whether the university will get back to normal after this is unclear.
RNZ International's Ben Robinson-Drawbridge. Thanks so much, Ben. We really appreciate it. And if Ben or any of our excellent RNZ International people can update the situation further and have absolute confirmation about the extent of the injuries and whether any of those students have been killed, we will immediately return to them. It's 29 minutes past 5. A $20 billion plan to help the Defence Force in a time of increasing international uncertainty has been unveiled in the latest white paper. The Prime Minister says turmoil in the Asia-Pacific region and elsewhere is presenting new challenges. He says New Zealand can no longer rely on its geographical isolation for protection. And they keep highlighting as an example of this far-reaching cyber attacks. Looking at all this is our political reporter, May Heron.
As well as boosted cybersecurity, more intelligence personnel will be hired to help analyse and distribute information collected from surveillance. The Defence Minister, Jerry Brownlee, says cyber threats have grown markedly.
Cyber is now a significant weapon. If you think about everyone sitting in this room, how much your life is somewhat dependent upon the cyber world through the various electronics that we carry with us. and the systems that we rely on to make sure that they deliver to us what we want. Now that you can multiply that across a whole economy.
The White Paper cites tensions in the East and South China Seas, increases in military spending across Southeast Asia, degrading relations between Russia and the West, and intensifying turmoil across the Middle East and North Africa as possible threats. The Prime Minister, John Campbell, says New Zealand's geographical isolation doesn't provide the protection it once did.
As a maritime nation dependent on open trade routes, our security and prosperity is inextricably linked to events occurring far from our shores. New Zealand needs a defence force that can protect New Zealand and also contribute to international security and stability.
Maritime security is a major priority for the Defence Force, with illegal fishing one of the biggest problems. The paper also notes escalating tensions in the South China Sea could have serious implications for trade routes and New Zealand's ability to service key export markets. The Chief of the Defence Force, Lieutenant General Tim Keating, agrees.
A secure maritime environment is vital to ensure our continued prosperity through maritime trade, as it is estimated that 99% of New Zealand's exports and imports are delivered by sea transport. We just can't leave maritime security responsibilities to others without having a credible contribution ourselves.
There are also plans to replace aircraft, frigates and possibly the Army's light armoured vehicles over the next 15 years. However, Labour's defence spokesperson, Phil Goff, says the paper lacks detail and fails to list the preferred options to replace these assets.
The decisions need to be made now. $20 billion has been set aside. We don't know whether that's value for money because we don't know what they're spending it on specifically. This suggests that they haven't done the in-depth work that should have been done by now.
While the overall plan has a $20 billion price tag over the next 15 years, the White Paper does not contain a specific breakdown of costs. The government says allowances for more money for both operational and capital spending will have to be made in coming years. From Parliament for Checkpoint, May Heron.
Very full program tonight. Coming up on Checkpoint Sky Television in talks with Vodafone regarding a possible merger. Why and what might it mean? The government considers pre-purchasing motel rooms to help people who are in the most critical need. The police say they're treating the death of a 3-month baby boy in Tauranga as a homicide, and hundreds gather outside Muhammad Ali's childhood home ahead of his public memorial service on Friday, New Zealand time. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. I'm sure you know these details, but you can text us 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, and don't forget our excellent Facebook page, and we're on Twitter too. Lots coming up between now and 6, and we begin the half hour with Sharon Brett-Kelly with the headlines.
Thank you, John. There's confusion over the extent of any deaths or injuries at a student gathering in Papua New Guinea. Reuters is reporting 4 students died and as many as 15 were injured as they gathered to march on Parliament in Port Moresby. Students say the police fired on them, but the University of Papua New Guinea says no students were killed and the police opened fire with tear gas canisters only. Meanwhile, tonight's Oceania Nations Cup football semi-final between New Zealand and New Caledonia in Port Moresby will go ahead. The stadium is 6 kilometres from the university. Hillary Clinton has thanked her supporters for helping her reach an historic moment for women, the Democratic nomination for president. Earlier, Mrs. Clinton won the Democratic primary in New Jersey, cementing her hold on her party's nomination. She went on to win South Dakota and New Mexico, while her rival Bernie Sanders took North Dakota. The race in California is set to be close. The government is considering pre-purchasing some motel rooms to help people who are in the most critical housing need. The Social Housing Minister, Paula Bennett, gave details to MPs at a select committee meeting today, saying 100 rooms would be easily filled in a week. People eligible for the new Emergency Housing Special Needs Grant would not have to pay the money back. The police are treating the death of a baby in Tauranga as a homicide. The 3-month-old boy died at the city's hospital last night. A $20 billion investment plan has been unveiled in the latest Defence White Paper. The government says it includes a new cyber security system and a plan to replace aircraft, frigates and possibly the Army's light armoured vehicles over the next 5 years. And that's the headlines. I'll be back at 6 o'clock with more news.
Shannon Brett-Kelly, who was filling in for me last week on Checkpoint and is filling in for Katrina Batten tonight, is also a senior reporter and is going to do some producing on Checkpoint. A renaissance woman. Thank you so much, Sharon. See you at 6. It's been dubbed perhaps somewhat unkindly Skodaphone. Jokes aside, this would be a very big merger indeed. What we can confirm is that pay TV company Sky is in talks with Vodafone Group over a merger of their New Zealand operations. But, and these are Sky's own words, the discussions are ongoing and incomplete and may not result in a transaction occurring. The initial reaction seems to be pretty positive, a marriage of pragmatism, if not convenience. Vodafone is a telco without what's called content. Sky under John Valent has content but needs new ways of connecting with current and potential viewers. We asked Blair Galpin, a senior equities analyst at Forsyth Barr, to consider all of this for us.
What Vodafone would do would be two things. Is one, give a lot more expertise on delivering a very sharp service over the telco products. And what we haven't seen yet is a mobile positioning by Sky. So we know Sky have got the mobile rights for a lot of the sports content, but we haven't seen a mobile play out of them. So I think what you'd also likely to see is combined Vodafone and Sky developing a mobile content play of some kind.
How do they monetize this? At the moment, you pay a rate to Sky depending on how much you get per month. Would that still work? Would it be tied in with your Vodafone bill? How would that happen?
I mean, typically, when there's, if you're a general consumer, whether it's myself or yourself, generally, if you buy more services from one provider, you'd look to pay a discount for them. Whether you're buying your electricity and phone bill together, you're buying gas and electricity together, you normally want a discount. So the issue for Sky TV and Vodafone together will be trying to get new customers, so winning off parties that they're not currently selling services to. The other part will be looking at offering new services that don't currently do it. So that's really how they monetize it, because you'd see if it's an existing Sky plus Vodafone customer, normally you'd be wanting a discount. Otherwise, you'd be looking at a bill north of $200 a month, and which is always quite a hard selling point from a marketing perspective.
Hell yes. And we've seen Sky subscriber base begin to fall. Their share price is down almost 30%, isn't it, over the past 12 months?
Yeah.
So they needed to do something, didn't they?
They needed to do something. John has already said previously in the media that he wasn't looking to buy Vodafone, but this is a much easier model. I mean, Vodafone is a very big company, bigger than Sky TV in many respects in terms of its underlying earnings. So a merger of some kind makes more sense. There are parts of Vodafone that if you're Sky TV you wouldn't want to own in terms of the business corporate side of things. But really the play there is in the residential space. I think there's some interesting synergies between the two of them.
Gosh, Blair, it's fascinating, isn't it? It's not terribly long ago that Vodafone and Sky were both the big, brash, revolutionary new players in the market. I mean, most of our listeners will remember that. Now they're having to reinvent themselves simply to keep up.
They are, and effectively, you have the likes of Netflix globally offering, alternative to your Sky movies or your Soho type products. I suppose where Sky has relied upon the sports content. They have tied up, or they have got contract rights for most of the key sporting events, the ones that most of us watch anyway, for the next 4 or 5 years. So they've been very smart in getting those rights, but they haven't been able to monetize that. So they've been able to sell satellite services to satellite customers, but they've been struggling to get those people wanting an online, on-demand service. They've been struggling to get those customers on board. So this is what they'll be looking to try and tackle, provide better solutions around that space.
And the reason for that in part is that young people don't want to pay for content, right? And so if you are sitting there, if somebody is listening to this now and they're 22 years old and they're sitting there with their phone, whatever they're looking at, they're probably getting for free. So it makes sense for Sky to package up with a telco, because at least those kids are paying for their phones.
Yeah, and I think the difficult part is how do you turn this into the more revenues for the two of the companies, and that's where I think it's around innovative packages that would attract someone to an extra service that they wouldn't have otherwise brought, or trying to win a customer off, say, a Spark or another, or a Vocus, for instance, where they're currently with another provider. So that's where trying to put, and you can see this in, say, the likes of Spark, offering things like free Spotify with the accounts, or a lot of free services. It's about trying to bundle and make yourself different from the other providers of the market.
So in short, given what we know about it now, and a lot of this is speculation and supposition, it makes sense?
I mean, look, it's not going to be hard to pull this together. I mean, they're both big companies. They both have their own cultures. It makes sense medium to long term, but like any sort of merger, this sort of if it occurs, there'll be sort of teething problems. So it does make sense, but don't expect sort of changes immediately, I suppose what I'd say.
Blair Galpin from Forsyth Bar. Nona Peltier is sitting beside us. Nona, that was the specifics from Blair, the Vodafone Sky specifics. What's the big picture? How's the market reacting?
Well, it's interesting. It was sort of not really a big surprise because Sky's been looking at doing something with a lot of money. They have about, $400 million sitting there, and they've been taking advice from Citibank on how to spend it. So I guess this is maybe what they're looking at doing. Well, remains to be seen what they end up doing. Spark's share price didn't like it very much.
So they are Vodafone's big competitor, right?
That's right. And their share price fell like more than 4% today. So that actually had an impact on the market. They were down 15.5 cents to $3.48.5. So, yeah. There was a market reaction, all right.
So that's the market suggesting, if people are selling Spark, that's suggesting that the market likes what Vodafone may be doing.
Could be that they're just hedging their bets there. We'll see what happens. I mean, we're still a long way from knowing what's going to actually come out, because whatever happens, you can bet the Commerce Commission will be looking at what goes on there, because of the sport and so on, you can't have a monopoly in terms of telecommunications. There's only 3 big players, so you could imagine that the Commerce Commission would be taking a very close look at what happens there.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So and of course there was a lot of other stuff that happened today.
Tell us about it. What happened?
Well, okay. So let's see. One of the big stories today was Xero. Xero has made a deal with Wells Fargo. That's a big U.S. bank. They do banking with 1/3 of every household in the United States and over 3 million small businesses. And Wells Fargo is going to integrate Xero's software into their banking system, so you can have like banking and accounting software packaged together. So there's a lot of potential there.
This is good for Xero,
yeah,
isn't it?
and that's right. And then their share price, came up quite a bit. It sort of settled down a little bit. It was up 1% today, so that's quite good for Xero. We had Sky City. They lifted their trading halt today. They almost finished up their capital raising. They've successfully raised $263 million. That's a lot of money. So they're in a good mood today. Yeah, I had a chat with their chief financial officer. They don't have a CEO at the moment.
That's right, dear old Nigel.
Yeah,
he went into the sunset carrying a pot of gold, didn't he? By golly.
Yeah, they were pretty happy. And their share price was up as well, up 11 cents. So you could imagine the impact that Spark has had, considering our market overall was down. Our market actually fell, 2/3 of a percentage point, down 46 points to 6,992. And that, if you can imagine, we've had these ups. Yeah. Oh, another interesting thing on the market today, we had Kathmandu filing a suit against Briscoe over that failed takeover bid. Briscoe, who was a major shareholder in Kathmandu, paid some damages, I guess, or some compensation to Kathmandu for that failed takeover bid almost about a year ago now. But hey, it wasn't enough. That was $600,000. They want more. Yeah, they're looking for, I think, a couple of $1 million.
Oh,
so we'll see.
That's a tense relationship with the major shareholder, isn't it?
I'll say.
And Nona, the dollar. This is fascinating because the Reserve Bank are announcing the OCR tomorrow. We're talking about this with Bernard Hickey later. But what did the dollar do today?
Well, the dollar has been rising in late trading. We're up over 70 cents. So that's the highest we've been for over a month.
Right.
70 cents US. That's partly not just because people are now pricing out a rate drop tomorrow, but they're also seeing that what the Australian Central Bank has done has strengthened the Australian dollar, and bets are off on that US dollar rate hike. So yeah, interesting. We're at 70 cents US and 93.8 Australian.
Nona Peltier, thanks so much. I look forward to talking to you about the reaction to the OCR announcement tomorrow. Thanks, Nona. Really appreciate it.
Bye.
A steel trader who claims dangerously flawed steel is being used in New Zealand says officials have contacted him worried about public safety. Ian Jacob, who's the managing director of Milpro Hong Kong, says the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment is insisting he back up his claims and shows it his list of questionable projects. Now, the ministry has confirmed to RNZ News that it wants to meet with Mr Jacob and to see his list to get to the bottom of it. Last Friday, Mr Jacob told Morning Report that contractors on the Huntly bypass had been willfully blind in buying bad steel from China, and the Transport Minister Simon Bridges was reckless to say it was very unlikely to happen again. Today, he told our reporter Max Toll that the ministry has come to him concerned about public safety.
They've emailed me to ask
Whether there's specific projects that I'm aware of that their seal certificates have been forged, of course, I don't know that information. What I've suggested to them is there are some projects that possibly should be investigated because we have seen piles after they've been driven into the ground have had test samples cut out of them, and that doesn't happen unless there's something wrong. They were concerned from a point of view of public safety. I have suggested to them that if they were available on the 17th of June, I would be in Wellington and I would be happy to sit down with them and go through exactly what's going on in the industry. I haven't had a reply to that email as yet.
So what will you be able to tell MB about steel in New Zealand?
Well, I think what we can tell them is, we've had many years of experience of this. We can tell them exactly what goes on with steel from low-cost countries. I mean, you can buy steel out of low-cost countries that specifically New Zealand or Australian steel mills would scrap the first run of steel that they run that doesn't meet specs, whereas in some of these countries they package that up and sell it at a discounted rate. And fabricators buy that steel at a discounted rate knowing that it doesn't comply. And quite a bit of that goes on. And there was a project we were involved in specifically with a New Zealand contractor, and the New Zealand contractor found this. Obviously, were concerned by it, got us involved, and they found that 40% of the steel that they tested failed. They abandoned the fabricator and asked us to recover the project for them. So, we know the background to what goes on.
The last time you spoke to RNZ, you said that if you did get a chance to speak with the Minister, Simon Bridges, you had stories that would make his hair stand on end. Is that the kind of thing we're talking about?
Look, absolutely. We've seen lots and lots of this, and for us, it's commonplace, because I think the problem in New Zealand is no one actually understands what goes on, and no one also believes, I think, that the kind of level of corruption that's in low-cost countries.
What about New Zealand?
I don't think particularly there's corruption in New Zealand at all. I think it's just, as I said, it's willful naivety about what's happening, and it's the ability to say, well, I passed the requirements on to the next guy, and he was supposed to do it. And this has been commonplace in sourcing, not just steel, but everything for many years.
It's Ian Jacob talking to our reporter Max Toll. The man accused of murdering his 5-month-old daughter told emergency staff she had slipped in the bath and gone into stun mode. Troy Lewis Stewart Solomon has denied murdering Aliyah and is on trial at the High Court in Auckland, where his 3 111 emergency calls were played to the jury today. They are considered very material to this case, and they were played in the court. A warning, though, they are harrowing listening.
Tell me exactly what happened.
My baby just got into her mouth. She's just burping a lot. Her eye contact is not looking at me.
So she took water into her mouth?
Yes, and she just looks like she's in stun mode or something. I don't know, she's breathing, but she's burping. Water out of her nose is coming out.
Okay.
She's falling into her bath. She's only 6 months old.
Okay,
5 months.
Okay, I'm organising help for you. Are you with her now?
Yes, I am. Yeah, of course I am.
Okay.
What the
Right, is she awake?
No, she's just unconscious. It looks like she's unconscious. She's not breathing.
Is she breathing?
Just breathing. I think she's breathing. She's not awake. She's not awake.
Is she breathing?
I don't know.
Well, the Crown says baby Aliyah's broken leg and severe head injuries are consistent with her being swung by her leg into a hard surface while she was in the care of Mr. Solomon. Our reporter Edward Gay has been covering the trial, and he joins us now. Edward's sitting in the court. That's tough listening. All of this is tough listening, isn't it? Mr. Solomon tried CPR. Is that the case? Is that what's been said?
Yeah, that's right. And he was talked through how to do this by the emergency operator. She gave him instructions, and he also tried to resuscitate her, try to get her heart going again. Today we also heard from the ambulance staff who were first on the scene. One of those was Gary Skur, and he described baby Aliyah as being cold and mottled in colour. He said he couldn't find a pulse, that there was no breathing and no heartbeat. He said it was unusual that she was cold because the notes that he got on the way to the job suggested she'd been in the bath. And Mr. Skur said she was also dry and didn't appear to have any eczema cream on her. He had no trouble attaching the monitor electrodes to her chest to find this heart, to try and find a heart rate.
Okay, that last piece of information is considered material. Why?
It's considered important because the defence say that Mr. Solomon actually dropped Aliyah as he pulled her out of the bath, and the defence say that accounts for the fatal head injuries. Under cross-examination from Mr Solomon's lawyer, Jane Northwood, Mr Skerr confirmed that Mr Solomon was crying, he was upset at the time. This ambulance driver, 35 years on the job, and even he wept as he confirmed that, the decision had to eventually be made to stop resus attempts. Earlier we also heard from the mother of Alia, and she's the partner of Mr Solomon, and she described Mr Solomon as a devoted father who helped with the feeding and the changing and putting the baby to sleep. And this trial set down for a further 3 weeks.
Edward Gay, thank you. Edward Gay, who sits in the court. Thanks so much, Edward. We appreciate it. The time on Checkpoint is 10 minutes to 6. The Social Housing Minister, Paula Bennett, says the government is considering pre-purchasing motel rooms to help people who are in the most critical housing need. Work and Income has been under fire from opposition parties and housing advocates for allowing some people to rack up tens of thousands of dollars worth of debt for motel rooms that are being used as emergency housing. The extent of the debt was first revealed on this program a fortnight ago. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
Paula Bennett appeared before the Social Services Select Committee this morning. She told MPs a lot of work's being done around putting people up in motels or boarding houses if they're stuck for accommodation.
We've been looking at should we almost pre-purchase in some motels. We've got a report that's just come in yesterday morning that we're looking at that, if that just sort of gets us through particularly this winter period, and it's something we could do relatively quickly, being in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Mrs Bennett was questioned by Labour's Carmel Sepuloni about whether she'd collated the data on how much the government has spent on emergency accommodation for motels to date.
No, because that sits on the individual's it sits on the individual's case, not an aggregate, if you like.
So how will you be able to determine how much money will be required for the pre-purchasing of the motels if you haven't collated that data
we
yet?
Already know. We know how many. We can certainly see how many people are currently sleeping rough or don't have places to go. So it would be kind of safe for us to assume that if we pre-purchased 100 places in motels, we would easily fill them in a week.
Labour's housing spokesperson Phil Twyford is not impressed with the idea.
Well, this is the national government running up the white flag. They are declaring defeat. This is a failed housing policy when the minister comes along to Select Committee and says that she's bulk booking motels for homeless people.
Last week, the Salvation Army said false statements by the government had jeopardised its ability to work with the homeless. It said it never accompanied ministry officials to check on people living in cars. Paula Bennett has taken responsibility for the matter, as she says she told Mr Key about the so-called flying squad dispatched by the government to help the homeless. During question time, Phil Twyford asked Mrs Bennett why she thought she had nothing to apologise for when the Salvation Army said her mistake had put their ability to help the homeless at risk.
I'm sure, as in most members of this House, have a huge amount of respect for the work that the Salvation Army do with our most vulnerable, and as a consequence of that, as I say, the statements weren't meant to be misleading. All I can do is front up and say that I made that mistake, and that's where it sits. But honestly, you apologise to Chinese and I'll apologise to the Salvation Army.
Paula Bennett also revealed today that 130 people had expressed an interest in taking up the government's cash offer to leave Auckland for $5,000. But she says it's early days and there's no information yet about where those people want to relocate to. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Chris Bramwell.
Well, tonight the most important heritage building within Christchurch's iconic arts centre is to reopen to the public. After 5 years, with almost half of Christchurch's heritage buildings destroyed as a result of the earthquakes, the Arts Centre, with its heavy stone buildings and Gothic revival style, has taken on an even greater significance in the city. The centre has largely been shut off to the public for the last 4 years, but is now starting to progressively reopen as restoration work is completed. And tonight, the Great Hall, built in 1882, will open its doors to the public again. With us live, we hope, is Andre Lovett, the Chief Executive of the Arts Centre. Andre, you are there and you are inside. What is it like being back in there?
Kia ora, John. It's fantastic to see people back in these buildings. It's been 5 years since we've had people in this special building, and it's so amazing for all of us who have worked so hard over that period of time to restore it, to see people back.
I find it very moving to see you in there. And there's a roaring fire behind you. It looks beautiful. Gosh, the refurbishment work has been top notch.
Yeah, look, honestly, we've been so fortunate to have such a hard-working and skilled team doing this work. As you said in your intro, it is the oldest part of the Arts Centre site, and from the perspective of the site, which has 23 heritage buildings on it, it really very much is the heart and soul of this very special place. And I think in Christchurch, given that we've lost so much of our built heritage and our ability to tell stories about our community, I think it's so fantastic to see people here this evening.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Very large window behind you, famous Oamaru stone. How did you deal with all of that stuff? What was done to preserve and retain things that had survived the earthquake?
So the magic is actually not visible. So everything that's been done to make this building stronger and more robust and have modern systems to keep people warm is actually concealed underneath all of the heritage fabric. So in very simple terms, the team has taken this building apart, conserved all of the original heritage fabric, put in a new structure, made it strong, made it safe, and then put the heritage fabric back.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful work. I see here in my notes, by the end of the year, 4 more buildings and 2 more quads will be open. The project should be finished by the end of 2019 at a cost of $290 million. Wow. So by the end of the year, what will be happening there?
So basically we've got a range of things going to be open. Our public spaces, the quadrangles where we exhibit art and hold arts festivals and outdoor cinema and things like that will be open. We've got the University of Canterbury's Classic and Music departments opening here. We've got some hospitality things opening. We've got Rutherford's Den, an amazing educational exhibit and attraction for people to learn about Rutherford and his legacy. All of that's going to be open.
Oh, have a wonderful night tonight, Andre. We're delighted for you, and it certainly looks fantastic. For those who are listening on the radio, it looks magnificent behind Andre as he stands there. Andre's the Chief Executive of the Arts Centre, and really one of the most important, I think, psychologically most important reopenings since the earthquake taking place tonight. As warnings continue for people in Tasmania and New South Wales to remain cautious of further flooding, people from those storm-ravaged parts of Australia are beginning to share their stories of survival. One family, including a 3-month-old baby, was almost swept away by floodwaters in the northern Tasmanian town of Latrobe. They'd evacuated their house using their car, but it became flooded and a local police officer had come to their rescue. The ABC's Felicity Ogilvie has been speaking to the mother of that family.
It was dark and wet when 35-year-old Megan Kravchuk and her 40-year-old fiancé Michael Quigley put their 3-month-old son MJ in their car and evacuated their house in Latrobe.
We escaped our driveway through water. All we could see was water. We have a 3-month-old son and we packed as much as we could. It came so quick. We got to Gilbert Street. Gilbert Street was full of water. Everywhere was water. We got to the bridge and then we hit water and it started flooding the car.
Megan Kravchuk says the floodwater came up to her stomach. A small fence stopped their car from being swept into the Mersey River.
This rip took us straight to the fence. If it wasn't for this small barbed wire fence, because we're only in a white Corolla, and if it wasn't for this small barbed wire fence, we would have been gone into the river. And so the rip was and it was just coming in, it's so quick and it's so strong, you know. I've been in waters in Tasmania and this rip was just unreal and you just get so tired.
Ms Kravchuk says her fiancé was able to move their son to safety.
My partner managed to save our lives. He got my son out through the back car. The car was already filled half off with water by this stage. He went around the side, got my son out through the window, and then got to an abandoned car that we'd passed. We didn't know the water was there at that time. And if it wasn't for that abandoned car and my partner being able to come back and get me out of the water because it was so strong, we wouldn't be alive today.
They used a mobile phone to call the police for help. She says a local policeman rescued them by wading through the floodwaters.
All of a sudden we saw headlights and it was Peter Dugner in a Land Cruiser thinking, and he made a split decision, you know, like, can I get to these people? And I don't know how he waded through. God gave him his strength because I don't know how he waded through these waters 3 times because he got our son, got to the car, 60 metres away, this abandoned car, and then back to us in our car, and then back again, and then back again. You know, it's just, and then we got to the car, the police officer came to our left, and we were out of there.
The family are now staying with their relatives.
That report from the ABC. Evening, John. I'm at work listening to your interview with the young girl living in the van. I'm a tough nut, but she had me in tears, literally, living in a van, and all this girl wants is a library and enough light to read with. This is not the New Zealand I know and am proud of. That feedback representing a lot of what you are saying about that interview. Kia ora everyone, you are with Checkpoint on RNZ National, on the radio as always, screening live on Freeview Channel 50 and streaming live on the RNZ website. However you are doing so, thank you for joining us. Tonight, the flying squads we've heard about. Who's in them? What do they do? When did they go out to talk to the homeless? Why the Reserve Bank has got it wrong on inflation and what that means for interest rates, according to Bernard Hickey. This is a fascinating subject and claims new guidelines for pay equity disputes could cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Goodness, we'll have more on that coming up. But before all of that, here is RNZ News with Sharon Brett-Kelly.
Kia ora, good evening. Hillary Clinton is thanking her supporters for helping her win the Democratic nomination for the American presidency, describing it as a milestone for women. Mrs. Clinton has won the Democratic vote in New Jersey, New Mexico and South Dakota, 3 of the 6 states holding primaries today. The California primary will count the most, where polls show the race between Mrs. Clinton and her rival Bernie Sanders is close. The BBC's John Campbell reports.
Hillary Clinton spoke in a hangar at the Brooklyn Navy Yard under a banner with a single word on it: history. But what she's done in seeing off her rival Bernie Sanders is only phase 1. Phase 2 is defeating her Republican opponent Donald Trump. A change of gear and tone. Instead of fighting Bernie Sanders, she praised him to the rafters. The Clinton campaign will be love-bombing the Vermont senator from now on in a bid to win his support and to unify the Democratic Party. Instead, her fire was concentrated on Donald Trump, a man temperamentally unfit to be president, she said.
John Campbell in Brooklyn, New York. Civil unrest has broken out in parts of Papua New Guinea after conflicting reports on deaths and injuries when the police broke up a student demonstration. The PNG Parliament was told 4 students had been killed, but the police and the University of Papua New Guinea say no one has died and officers used tear gas only. A doctor, Richard Sanaka, says there are 20 wounded students at Port Moresby's hospital, 5 in critical condition. The students have been calling for the Prime Minister, Peter O'Neill, to be prosecuted over alleged corruption. The ABC's Eric Tocek reports.
The PNG government, quoting hospital management, says 4 students were taken to the Port Moresby General Hospital with gunshot wounds this morning. They say none were life-threatening and all patients are stable. Another clinic says it's treating 9 wounded patients. Witnesses say police fired upon unarmed students as they tried to march from the University of Papua New Guinea to Parliament. There are reports some students died from gunshot wounds, but as yet no deaths have been confirmed. Security companies are reporting looting and fighting in parts of the capital.
Eric Tocek in Port Moresby. The Foreign Affairs Ministry says there's no indication any New Zealanders have been caught up in the violence. The ministry says there are 136 New Zealanders registered as being in PNG and it's urging them to let family know they're safe. It's also advising them to exercise a high degree of caution in all parts of Port Moresby and to avoid crowds and protests. The government is considering pre-purchasing some motel rooms to help people who are in the most critical housing need. The Social Housing Minister, Paula Bennett, also revealed today 130 people had expressed an interest in taking up the government's cash offer to leave Auckland for $5,000. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
Currently, Work and Income loans people money to rent a motel room as emergency housing when there's nowhere else to put them. Paula Bennett says the government is considering pre-booking motel rooms particularly through the winter period, and this could be done in the next 2 to 3 weeks. If people are eligible for the new Emergency Housing Special Needs Grant, they would not have to pay back the cost of the room. Labour's housing spokesperson Phil Twyford says the plan is the government declaring defeat and admitting its housing policy has failed. From Parliament, Chris Bramwell.
Home care services say they cannot afford the hundreds of millions of dollars it might cost to pay their predominantly female workforce more under proposed new pay equity guidelines. The guidelines aim to make it easier for women to file pay equity claims by allowing them to negotiate directly with their employers rather than going through the courts. The Home and Community Health Association, which represents the employers of 20,000 home and support workers, says it's worried about who will pick up the tab. Its chief executive, Julie Haggie, says most employers in the sector are already financially stretched and can't afford to pay higher wages. She says many are operating at a loss at the current rates being paid to workers, and it's not realistic to expect any response to pay equity claims. The Environment Minister, Nick Smith, says removing 90,000 litres of toxic chemicals from a Timaru building will be a high priority for the government. A vat of acid caught fire at Concourse electroplating in February last year, causing the evacuation of hundreds of people. The Timaru District Council and WorkSafe issued abatement notices to the owner, ordering him to identify the chemicals and clean up the site. No progress was initially made, but the owner has now agreed to close the business. The Canterbury Regional Council is preparing an application for the government's Contaminated Sites Redemption Fund to help remove the chemicals at an estimated cost of $750,000. The application will be made to Dr Smith by the end of the month. To sport, and New Zealand golfer Tim Wilkinson has shown there's no room for sympathy when it comes to securing a place at one of golf's majors. The 37-year-old finished second at the qualifying tournament in Florida to qualify for next week's US Open, which will be Wilkinson's first appearance at a major. However, as Matt Chatterton reports, Wilkinson was involved in a controversial incident which proved costly for his playing partner.
On the 11th hole in his final round, Wilkinson called an infraction on his playing partner, 17-year-old Wonjun Lee. Lee tapped down his pitch mark behind his ball as it sat on the fringe of the green, which violated golfing rules. Wilkinson saw the incident and reported it to match officials. The high school student was subsequently penalised 2 shots and finished the tournament at 5 under, 1 shot off qualifying. The US Open gets underway at the Oakmont Country Club in Pennsylvania next week. This is Matt Chatterton.
And the Oceania Nations Cup football semi-final between New Zealand and New Caledonia in Port Moresby has just kicked off despite the violence at the University of Papua New Guinea 6 kilometres away. And that's the news.
Leaving a legacy.
He was the ultimate risk taker. He stood up. He took on the great big issues of the time. A lot of the corporate community didn't like him. The Maoris of the North started to call him the Maori version of Al Capone.
Challenging a judge.
We want to prevent him from being able to engage in this kind of minimization and trivialization of violence against women.
Danger on the roads.
Most people go and move in the country because it's a beautiful place to retire without any way of getting around when they get to the point where they can't drive safely.
News to get you talking. Guyan Aspinall and Susie Ferguson, Morning Reports, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, the final big round of US primaries in the Democrats' battle between Clinton and Sanders. And after 10, the true story of JFK's forgotten sister, Kik, who charmed the English aristocracy, but her life ended in tragedy. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, rain and northeast gales easing tomorrow. Auckland, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and northern Gisborne cloudy. A few showers today, occasional rain tomorrow. The remainder of Gisborne, also Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine today. High cloud increasing tomorrow. Waikato to Taranaki, including Taumaranui, mostly cloudy with scattered rain developing tomorrow afternoon. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington, fine today. High cloud tomorrow with late rain for Kapiti and Wellington. Nelson and Buller, cloud increasing today with drizzle tonight. Rain tomorrow with heavy falls possible later. Westland and Fiordland rain developing about Fiordland this afternoon and elsewhere overnight with some heavy falls. Easing from the south tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury fine today. Cloud increasing tomorrow with rain about northern Marlborough from afternoon, possibly heavy. Scattered rain elsewhere. Otago and Southland, high cloud increasing. Patchy rain tomorrow. And the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy.
Thank you very much indeed, Sharon. Appreciate it. Sharon is the sick cover for almost everyone, aren't you? When Eileen, the bureau chief in Auckland, is away, Sharon fills in, right? Mm-hmm. When I was away last week, you filled in. When Katrina's away tonight, you fill in. You're a senior reporter, and you're going to fill in when Catherine Warbridge, one of our producers, is on leave.
I am.
And business, and you do business too.
I do business as well.
Goodness gracious me.
Because I'm so old.
Oh, wait a sec, that's Paul Thompson on the phone saying pay rise for Sharon Britt Kelly. Tremendous news.
I'd be so lucky.
Thanks for your call, Paul. Excellent. 10 minutes past 6. Pip's asking if you build houses.
No.
Right. Speaking of which, so-called flying squads charged with finding homeless people and offering them help are actually just non-governmental organisations, with the Ministry of Social Development playing what it calls a support role. Even the Prime Minister, John Campbell, thought ministry officials were among those on the ground. However, it's been revealed this is not the case, and the Social Housing Minister, Paul Thompson's taking the blame. Paul Thompson, the Social Housing Minister, I'll just do this again. This is what happens when you get loose on national radio. Things begin to fall apart. I apologise unreservedly. The Social Housing Minister, Paula Bennett, excellent, John, is taking the blame for the miscommunication. How has all of this played out? Alex Ashton, our reporter, has been taking a look.
The flying squads were first mentioned a couple of weeks ago by the Social Housing Minister, Paula Bennett, alongside new grants of up to $5,000 for people to leave Auckland. A week later, the Prime Minister, John Campbell, updated media on how those teams were going.
On, I think, Tuesday or Wednesday night, MSD and the Sallies went around and knocked on, I think, 8 cars that they could find. All 8 of those people refused to take support either from Sallies or from MSD. They went down to the city mission. Of the 8 people they could identify there that weren't known to them, 4 of them signed up and got support from MSD, and 4 of them, as I understand it, were considering their options.
So some people choose to live in cars? Is that
well, what I'm saying, I'm just simply saying of those 8 people that MSD and the Sallies could identify, knocked on the cars and asked them, can we give you support and can we give you help? Not just MSD, the Salvation Army, the 8 of them refused.
Flying squads made up of people from the Ministry of Social Development and the Salvation Army, approaching the homeless, offering help. The problem is, it wasn't true. The Salvation Army's Divisional Commander Ian Hudson told Checkpoint on Friday that those visits didn't happen.
There's been some kind of miscommunication because we have not gone round with any MSD people at all. Also, we haven't been knocking on doors. How we've tended to operate is we've taken a van there. We've been carefully developing relationships with people there, gaining their trust.
The gaffe came up in Parliament yesterday. There, the Social Housing Minister, Paula Bennett, admitted she was to blame for the Prime Minister being misinformed.
Mr. Speaker, yes. I told the Prime Minister that MSD was working in conjunction with NGOs, including the Salvation Army, to reach out to homeless people to see if they could offer assistance. I was not sufficiently clear that MSD were coordinating the activities and making staff available after hours to deal with any issues as they arose. He was 100% correct that the Salvation Army reported to MSD after the first night that of all the people they engaged, none wanted MSD's help.
And again, in question time.
I'm sure, as in most members of this House, I have a huge amount of respect for the work that the Salvation Army do with our most vulnerable, and as a consequence of that, as I say, the statements weren't meant to be misleading. All I can do is front up and say that I made that mistake, and that's where it sits.
So, if MSD officials aren't knocking on car windows and the Salvation Army refuse to, just who is on these so-called flying squads? Strive Communities Trust was also approached by MSD to visit homeless on its behalf. The Trust spent 2 nights last week, one in Mangere, the next in Otahuhu, searching for homeless to help. Its operations manager, Bill Peace, says MSD did offer to come along, but Strive declined. He says they approached fewer than a dozen people. It was a cold, wet night and at 6 p.m, too early. but those approached want help.
A couple. We had a couple. Most of them weren't requiring any assistance. They were okay with where they were at. Some of them, though they may have appeared to be needing assistance, or actually were there for other reasons. So so when we engaged, they were happy with where they were at, and they weren't requiring any assistance from us.
The ministry wasn't out on the ground, but did put staff in the Auckland City mission for 4 nights last week. It says there it spoke to 16 people and booked in 11 for housing assessments. For Checkpoint, Alex Ashton.
The Reserve Bank makes its official cash rate announcement tomorrow morning. The OCR currently sits at 2.25% and most analysts aren't expecting a reduction. But Bernard Hickey, analyst and publisher of The Hive newsletter, has pointed out the Reserve Bank has constantly overestimated inflation of late, setting the country's OCR on the basis of projections that haven't been correct. This means the Reserve Bank hasn't moved interest rates as low as many outside the bank have been predicting, and inflation has been below the midpoint of its official target for nearly 4 years. An undershoot. Of course, lower rates would mean yet more stimulus for the Auckland property market, but not lowering rates means inflation stays lower than its official target. The Kiwi dollar stays relatively high and exporters don't get the returns they might have been hoping for. So what about tomorrow? Well, as Bernard Hickey points out, many of those who might benefit most directly from lower rates seem resigned to the idea they won't go lower.
That's right. You hardly hear anything from the likes of Federated Farmers or Business New Zealand or exporters about that high currency. And remember, it's risen 2.5 cents in the last 3 or 4 days, partly in expectation that some people think the Reserve Bank won't cut tomorrow morning. And, in times gone past, when the currency was very high, people would complain about it. But for some reason, we haven't seen that same level of heat or complaint, in part because the Reserve Bank Board and the Finance Minister have essentially accepted this undershoot. They are saying, okay, we can't seem to get inflation back up into that 1 to 3% band, or particularly close to the 2% midpoint. But there are some extenuating circumstances, and the Reserve Bank itself has been saying, hey, don't look at the CPI number, although that's what its actual act says it should be targeting, yes, and instead look at the core inflation number. But even then, there's some debate about what that core inflation measure actually is, where the Reserve Bank seems to be the only one that knows what's in the black box underneath that core inflation number. And, there's some real questions about whether they should be cutting interest rates. At the same time, the Reserve Bank has to think about what all this means for the Auckland housing market, and that's why they're considering introducing a debt-to-income multiple limit, potentially later this year, early next year, and they've already started negotiations with the government. And that may be one of the things which pushes them closer towards a rate cut. If they think they can control lending growth, then that might help them. In fact, just in the last week, we've seen ANZ, the biggest bank, dial back its lending growth, tighten its lending criteria, particularly to investors in Auckland. And you have to wonder whether the Reserve Bank there has managed to try and control some of those expectations about lending growth to give it more flexibility on the interest rate side.
In the meantime, Graham Wheeler is making an announcement tomorrow morning. Should he cut rates?
Well, if he's only thinking about inflation, he should cut interest rates. Some people say down from 2.25% to 1.5%. Burl, Commonwealth Bank of Australia, and independent economists like Michael Riddell say 1.5% should be where it is. But he is going to worry about the Auckland housing market. And he thinks longer term what's happening with underlying inflation. I must say, given the Reserve Bank is looking to yet again tighten again the lending controls, then that gives us a bit more flexibility to cut interest rates.
You think it'll happen, Bernard?
Probably not, because the Reserve Bank Governor is seen as a reluctant cutter. And there are many within the Reserve Bank who think that the inflation dragon is just sleeping and it's about to wake up at any moment now, when actually for the last 3 or 4 years it's not just been asleep, it's been comatose.
Bernard Hickey, analyst, commentator and publisher of The Hive. We're having some wonderful feedback tonight and we're going to share some of it with you because it's heartwarming. Hello, John. I'm listening to your interview with TA. She was the 11-year-old girl we spoke to at about 5:15. She's one of a family of 8 who's been sleeping in a van. They're now at Te Puia Marae. And she wants a library. Well, Lynn Dawson, who is chair of the Friends of the Michael King Writers Centre and Peggy Pearl in your community, wonderful, Lynn, says that she is going to organise TA a library. I would love to start her off with her own library, and I can either do that at Te Puia Marae or when she gets that roof over her head. I have great access to a wide range of children's books, especially New Zealand children's books, and TA told me her favourite book, Lynn, is Whale Rider. I will provide the first bookshelf. If you can facilitate this or get me a contact to do so, I will make it happen at the convenience of TA and her family. That's a wonderful offer, and we know TA will cherish that. And John Dowsett, who's the General Manager of Butterfly Creek, which is out by the airport in Auckland, said, John, I listened with interest to the interview with the very impressive TA, who's been sleeping in a van with her family. What a girl. Our business, Butterfly Creek, would happily cover her school fees and transport if she can enrol in St Mary's or similar school. Bugger and cuss, they've missed a good girl here. If interested, I can be contacted at, and he's given us our details. We will absolutely make that happen. Thank you to everyone who has sent offers of love and kindness and empathy in the past hour. Employers say new guidelines for pay equity disputes could cost hundreds of millions of dollars, but one sector that would be hard hit says it has no money to pay. Under the guidelines, thousands of women involved in such claims will be able to negotiate directly with their employers rather than going through the courts. The report by the Joint Working Committee on Pay Equity aims to ensure that all women can claim the same pay as men in similar industries. Anusha Bradley reports.
Employers say New Zealand is behind the rest of the world on pay equity, and the government needs to move quickly to adopt the working group's recommendations. The head of the Employers and Manufacturers Association, Kim Campbell, says equal pay is already covered by the law so that men and women in the same jobs are paid the same. But he says equity, where men and women in similar jobs are paid the same, has vexed governments and businesses for a long time, and it can no longer be ignored.
We have a group of types of employment, say dominated by women, let's say aged care, suggesting that their pay is somewhat lower than work dominated by men, let's say firemen. Now, that's where the pay equity case becomes a bit difficult.
Kim Campbell says pay equity could cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and some industries will be hit harder than others. He says the government will pay the most because it funds a lot of the female-dominated sectors like aged care.
You could argue that those hundreds of millions of dollars are going to get recycled into society as consumption and saving anyway. But the alternative is the country ends the next 10 years in court. And frankly, we don't think the courts is the right place for this kind of thing to be dealt with.
The working group of unions and employers was set up after the rest home worker Christine Bartlett won her court battle, where she argued that her $14.32 hourly rate was the result of gender discrimination. The chief executive of the New Zealand Aged Care Association, Simon Wallace, says his sector is already negotiating pay equity for care and support workers as a result of the case.
We've been around that table negotiating in good faith to get a settlement in that case. The Joint Working Group on Pay Equity Principles will certainly be helpful for employers in the wider economy and future pay equity claims.
Julie Haggie is the Chief Executive of the Home and Community Health Association, which represents employers of 20,000 home and support workers, mostly women. She says the guidelines give employers clarity, but they will be costly.
Most of our workers in our sector are on minimum wage or close to the minimum wage. If you're shifting that upwards, 21,000 workers, 10 million hours of support going in every year just to aged care, and you multiply that by several dollars, you can start to get the sense of the size of the money.
She says the size of the wage rise still needs to be negotiated, but employers in the sector are already worried about who will pick up the tab.
And I think the government has put its hand up here and said we'll lead this set of negotiations. So we don't feel like we're completely on our own, but there's a deep level of anxiety about the implications of a serious uplift in wages. I mean, it's great for us, for our workers in terms of retention and recruitment. That would be great. It's just paying for it, really.
Julie Haggie says most employers are already stretched financially and can't afford to pay higher wages.
A number of them are already operating at a loss under the current rates. Our sector is so stretched that there isn't enough money to even pay for other legislation that's come through, such as employment standards legislation. I think that to expect any kind of response on pay equity is just not realistic.
Employers say they should not be the ones to bear the burden of the cost of pay equity, but rather it's a matter that society as a whole needs to deal with. The Minister for Workplace Relations and Safety, Michael Woodhouse, would not say how much it might cost or who will pick up the bill if the guidelines are adopted. For Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
And on the subject of pay, a man in Nauru has lost his job after challenging the government about his pay. Corey Mink says Broad Spectrum, the company that runs Australia's regional processing centre, caved into government demands to show him the door. He's one of 18 people challenging in court the government's exorbitant fee hike for new nominees in the upcoming election. This report from RNZ International's Alex Perrottet.
Corey Menke said he simply asked for a pay rise. $4.25 Australian an hour can't meet the cost of living in Nauru. He says Broad Spectrum told him they aren't allowed to pay more than the government pays its public servants. And while Broad Spectrum tells us it's not directed by the government on these matters, its termination letter to Mr Menke says just that. There's no reason for the sacking, no review or warning, just that the government directed it to do so. Mr Menke says even his managers couldn't explain.
They don't actually know what reason for this thing to happen. They just said it's a directive from the government. So they came over to apologize and said they cannot do nothing. It's not them, it's not Broad Spectrum. It's government.
Matthew Batsua, an MP who's currently suspended from the Parliament, says it's a disgrace there was no due process or any opportunity for review.
Just simply saying that we've been directed, so therefore you're out the door. That's simply not good enough. And you would think that a company from Australia like Broad Spectrum would have greater respect for the rights of employees. I'm sure that if it's in Australia, they wouldn't have done that. They wouldn't be able to do that.
Mr Menke is well known to the government. He was a former Consul General for a previous government and now he wants to run for Parliament. He's one of 18 people who filed an application in court to stop the government increasing the election nomination fee from 100 to 2,000 Australian dollars. Matthew Batsua says Mr Menke isn't the only one targeted. An employee at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who's also a co-applicant, is now feeling the heat.
I hear that he is currently under the microscope and is facing disciplinary charges by the public service for partaking in a legal challenge. And, to me, that's another example of the kind of actions by this government that speaks against democracy and fairness.
A former Justice Minister, David Lambourne, says the developments are nothing new for a government that has kicked out its Chief Justice and resident magistrate, banned opposition MPs from Parliament, and still won't let one of them, Roland Kuhn, travel out of the country to see his family.
We just lost that package from Alex Perrottet. This is a very important issue, and what's going on in Nauru is fascinating, so we're going to get it up online as soon as we possibly can. The Minister for the Environment says removing 90,000 litres of toxic chemicals from a Timaru building is a priority. A massive acid caught fire at Concours electroplating in February last year, causing the evacuation of hundreds of people. The cost of removing the remaining chemicals is estimated at $750,000, and the Canterbury Regional Council is planning to ask the government to help. Sally Murphy explains.
Concours Electroplating Limited, previously Chrome Platers Limited, has been operating in Timaru since 1961. After the fire last year, the Timaru District Council, WorkSafe and the Environmental Protection Authority issued notices asking the owner to identify the chemicals and store them more safely. In a statement on behalf of all the agencies involved, the WorkSafe Chief Executive Gordon MacDonald says after more than a year of inaction, progress has finally been made.
The agencies have negotiated an agreement with the owner that he will quit the property after he failed his obligations under the Health and Safety Act and the hazardous substances legislation. The EPA and WorkSafe have had all containers at the property tested to fully establish their contents and toxicity. There is an inventory of approximately 90,000 litres on site.
The cost to remove those chemicals is estimated to be $700,000.
Whoops-a-daisy. Sometimes these things happen. Actually, given the amount of live radio that gets made in this organisation, they happen remarkably rarely, but we seem to be losing things. We want to stress both of those packages we put online as soon as possible, Sally and Alex's package. We're going to try this one. Bill Clinton and Billy Christie will deliver eulogies at the Muhammad Ali public memorial service in front of an estimated crowd of 15,000 people. Hours before the star-studded service, a procession will take the former heavyweight champion across the city, touring historical monuments and past his childhood home. Here, we hope, with fingers crossed, is Paul Chapman.
Fans of Muhammad Ali are descending on his childhood home in Louisville, Kentucky in droves to pay their respects to the boxing legend. Ali died on June the 3rd after a long battle with Parkinson's disease.
He was a great man, and no matter what was going on in his life, he stood his ground and did the right thing.
He was a global community, a worldwide figure, yet there was still a local connection to him, very much here in the hometown of Louisville, and he inspired millions of people across the world.
Denise Irvin says her grandmother bought the house from Ali in 1960 and he never forgot his roots.
Every year he would come in and check on my grandmother and check on the house, and I appreciated that.
The funeral for the former heavyweight boxing champion, known as much for his political activism as he was his prowess in the ring, is due to take place on Friday.
That brings us to the end of Checkpoint tonight. 30 seconds to go. We've had a few technical errors, so Sally Murphy and Alex Perrottet's pieces will be up online. We recommend them both. Please do listen. 20 seconds to go. We want to thank you, everyone who's contacted us, volunteering generously to give things to TA to support her and her family in any way they can. We're going to go through those beautiful offers tonight and coordinate a response to them. Thank you all for giving a damn and for listening. That's Checkpoint for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night at 5.
Welcome to World Watch PM. I'm Elizabeth Brown. Tonight, Hillary Clinton makes history, a trail of destruction as the floaters recede in Tasmania, and controversial classes for migrants in Norway. Those stories and more in World Watch PM. She's waited a long time and finally Hillary Clinton can celebrate. Mrs. Clinton has declared victory in the Democratic race over her rival Bernie Sanders and will be the first female